Good day, everybody, and welcome to the webinar on the Draft Legal Sector Code that's been published for public comment, hosted by Diversifi. Anton van Geest is a B-BBEE technical expert who will be handling most of this presentation today. Quickly running through the agenda, we've got some key measurement principles, Draft Legal Sector Code elements and targets, which we'll sort of handle together. Each element of the legal sector code will have its own key measurement principles, so we'll throw them together as we go through that, and then we'll stop and have a look at the whole BE status support program, the cycle that one has to go through, and a little bit on the scorecard plan and the transformation strategy. We'll touch on that. So quickly running through advocates. If you're between 0 and 3 million rands worth of turnover, Anton will go through the turnover requirements and the details around that, especially with regards to the attorneys. I know there's a lot of questions around that. We've got three categories there: 0 to 3 million rands worth of turnover or annual revenue, and then we've got junior advocates, and then we've got less than 3 years in existence. The rest, there's a category for 3 to 15 million rands annual turnover, and then more than 15 million rands worth of turnover. If we look at the first three there, you're fully exempted from the legal sector scorecard as an exempted micro enterprise. However, a black advocate would be a status level 1 automatically, and all you need is a conformatory affidavit. White advocates, level 4. And then if you're a new entrant in the legal sector code, you're a level 5 and you need an affidavit. The details of that we can go through in the codes. I've got it on the slides. We will distribute the slides to you after the webinar. So next, we have the 3 to 15 million rand turnover. You'll have to do the qualifying legal sector enterprise scorecard, and then more than 15 million rands worth of revenue is a large enterprise scorecard, and do a BE certificate. For the attorneys, a little bit more complicated, running into a couple of sections here. Less than 3 years in existence and 1 to 3 partners or directors in the firm, or 0 to 3 million rands worth of turnover. You'll be fully exempted from the legal scorecard and have an EME certificate like in the generic codes. However, there's a choice from there where we'll see if you're a 100% black organization or a 51% black woman-owned organization, at least automatically qualify for a level 1 and only need an affidavit. And then also startups, less than 3 years in existence, is automatically a level 5. We do, however, have enhanced recognition sections there: 51 to 100% black owned, 35 to 51% black owned, and then less than 35% black owned, which will automatically, the top one there, 51 to 100, will receive a status level 4 automatically, 35 to 51 a status level 5, and the rest a level 6. However, the codes also now, or the draft legal sector code suggests that you can, you are partially exempted in that case. However, you can get a level up by doing one of the next 3 sections in the minimum requirements in those sections, which firstly would be a contribution to the legal sector transformation fund. Anton will look at those details later. And then also for skills development training in specialized areas for black legal practitioners. And then the LSC 500 represents the enterprise and supply development contribution. So the first one there, 51% black owned, can go up to a level 3 if one of those 3 are selected. The 35 to 51% black owned can go up to a level 4, and you can up your level if you're under 35% black owned to a level 5 by doing one of those 3 selections. The rest of us, or the rest that's over 3 million rands with a turnover or more than 3 partners or directors, will do the qualifying legal sector scorecard and do the B certificate through scorecard, as well as the larger enterprise, then above 15 million rands with the revenue is the large legal enterprise scorecard.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Adolf, for doing an introduction and taking us through the first bit of the legal sector code. So going into this sector code, I think you've all seen it coming. You've heard of that. Some of you attended a previous session that we presented on a very early version of that. There has been some changes subsequently. Not sure how many of you have read this version. You would have seen that there were some updates to it, but a lot of it is still the same as what we have discussed at that stage. In terms of what we process also with regards to commentary, this legal sector code has been now published in terms of section 995 of the BEE Act, very specifically for comment period, and it has for 60 days. So by 21st of September, we need to submit our comments to the DTIC. So we will submit some comments, and I would be happy to share my comments also with you that attend here in the session. Reason being is that if you feel that you want to also submit some comments to the DTIC, definitely do so on your letterheads. Don't just copy and paste my comments, but use whatever you want from that and add whatever you want to on that as well. Our experience is that if the DTIC gets more comments on certain issues, it could have a better impact. I do think one thing that and that's probably one of the elephants in the room at the moment, is when will this be promulgated for implementation? And that is a very good question. When, we don't know. It has, it's been fairly quickly in terms of when we've seen the previous versions against what we, against this draft version now that's been published. So I'm not sure how quick the wheels will turn from the legal sector charter council side to update, finalize, and submit to the Minister of the DTIC to promulgate. The fact is, immediately when it is promulgated, it will be implemented as well. So, you can argue it's retrospectively. Yes, it is. And even in Statement 003, which provides the guidance to sector codes, how to set up a sector code, what to consider, all of that, which is part of the BE code, which was promulgated back since 2007. It very specifically stated that there will be no phasing in period for this. So it will be applied immediately. If you have a certificate, an existing certificate, which is still valid based on the generic code which you're currently using, yes, the generic code certificate will still be valid until it expires, and then the new certificate will be will have to apply the legal sector code. You don't have any choice on that. It is the sector code that must be applied. Another thing is, if you have to plan and verification, want to buy yourself some time, consider that and try to get it done as soon as possible. The reason why I'm saying that is we don't know after the 60-day period ends how quick this will be turned around and be published. And I've seen some cases on various other sector codes which has been published or promulgated, and some companies who falls in that sector was in the middle of their verification. It required the verification agency to change the whole verification and issue the certificate based on this on the new sector code. So fact is, if you have a year end that passed and you want to renew your certificate and you want to ensure that you get you still buy yourself some time to plan for and implement for this new sector code, make sure that you get that done ASAP, I would say. don't delay on those ones. Also consider how long your current existing certificate is applicable. All of that needs to be taken into account, but just ensure that you buy yourself some time to implement. As we go through this targets and scorecards, you'll realize why we say that. Just, in terms of going into some measurement principles, the basic principle still applies, which states actually that substance takes precedence over legal form. You cannot go and split your entity now in different components just to be lower than the threshold and to qualify as an exempt micro enterprise, as they still refer to in the codes, which is referred to as an exempt legal enterprise. And this, be as it may, you cannot do that type of thing. It's an offense, and you cannot do that. For the larger companies, if you're a multinational type of foreign offices, for instance, you're only measurable still on your South African operations. There are the different scorecards for the attorneys and the advocates, which we'll have to discuss. And just as a basic principle in terms of your employment equity, when measured, you have to apply the rules and requirements as required in the Employment Equity Act. So if you are not a designated employer and not required to submit to DOL, you'll have to prepare that information according to the DOL. If you've been in the space on the generic code, you know what I mean, actually, that you have to classify your employees according to certain management levels and so on. A very important component also to this is that the legal sector code did not rewrite the whole set of generic codes. So in a matter where the legal sector code is silent, then the provisions of the BE codes are applicable. Where there's any conflict between the legal sector code and the generic code, the legal sector code will apply in that regard. If we go to the look at just recognition levels for your attorneys, the same recognition levels as is currently the case is still applicable. No changes on that, so I'm not going to go through that. For you to achieve a level 1, still exceed 100 points. A new table has been introduced for the attorneys, however. So for an attorney to achieve a level 1 contributor status, must achieve at least 50 points on the scorecard. In terms of the total scorecard for your advocates, it depends anything between 66 and about 90 odd points actually for the large advocates, and we'll get to that. So yes, it begs the question, why a lower scorecard? I think because there's different elements that is applicable, for instance, on the advocate. And yeah, it makes the road a little bit easier for an advocate actually to get up there, although there are some requirements, some very new requirements in terms of how to score on the existing elements. There aren't any new elements for the matter of it. It is the same elements that you've used to, but the detail in that is it's very different to what you've been exposed to and what you've been required to previously. Still, the priority element status apply in this scorecard. So that means if you don't comply with any one of these priority elements, you'll be discounted a level on your scorecard. That is very specifically applicable to your QSEs and your large enterprises, very specifically. So you'll be discounted if you don't achieve the sub-minimum of ownership, for instance, on the net value points, for instance. Skills development, if you haven't achieved 40% of the total weighting points of the skills development scorecard. And the same applies also in terms of enterprise, supplier development, and preferential procurement for all three of those sub-elements also for you to comply with those those requirements. So looking at the summary scorecard, comparing the attorneys to the advocates, the advocates is not required to be measured in terms of the ownership and management control. So only measured in terms of skills development, procurement, enterprise supplier development, and socio-economic development. However, for your QSEs, and your QSEs typically QSEs in the attorney space is typically between a 3 and a 15 million turnover are required to be measured on all of the elements as you have you got to know them in the generic code version as well. Different weightings to some extent, although the LSC tried to stay very close to the weighting points that you've seen. As I say, and as you will see, that there's definitely some underlying numbers actually that will change in this regard. So going into the ownership element, very specifically, starting off with the ownership element, and probably just before we go there, just looking at the summary or the summary scorecard, I think there's a few focuses for the legal sector code on how they diverted from the generic code. Very specifically, the legal sector code wants to provide and ensure access, and access in different ways. Starting off with socioeconomic development, provide access to justice to rural communities, poor, marginalized Black people in legal community centers, provide access, for instance, to areas like commercial type of contracting and access to that type of service for poor Black marginalized people in that area. Then also, especially for your smaller type of Black-owned attorneys. And very specifically, you'll see that as part of your enterprise development, for instance, or supplier development, where there's a requirement for partnering or subcontracting. So the theme of access is very specifically being provided. And then skills development, a huge focus on procure or on skills development for your candidate attorneys and even junior attorneys and the likes, actually, for skills development, less to an extent on the support side, or your support functions as they refer to. So all of the other ancillary type of divisions in your firm. So a large focus actually on for skills development, and it all goes back actually to giving access and to empower the justice industry, as I can if I can call it like that. So going into procurement in ownership, very much the same measurement as being done on the ownership side. As I said, there's no requirement very specifically for advocates, because it's mostly, it's actually sole proprietors. So you are not disqualified if you are not a Black person and practicing as an advocate in that regard. So looking at the measurement criteria, and a very interesting one for the ownership element, regardless of whether it's a large or a QSE in this case, is that you measured against the voting rights component, which you got to know previously, and the economic interest, which is measuring the access to dividends whenever there's dividends to be distributed, or profit distribution in that regard as well, but no measurement of the net value requirement as previously being done. But the priority element status is very specifically measuring your net value. So even though it's not being measured on the scorecard, and because the legal sector code is silent on the matter, it will revert back to the generic code mechanisms and so on. Yes, I have a question, and that is one of the comments that I will provide also, is definitely, provide more clarity on what would be the minimum points, because the 40% sub-minimum requirement refers to points and not necessarily the level that is required. So all of those needs to be clarified still, but the net value per se is not measured in this case. You'll notice throughout this scorecard of the legal sector code that there's phasing in compliance targets for year 1, year 2, and year 3. So I'm not going to go and try and explain to you every of these compliance targets. What I have as a message here is very specifically that the targets increased. You can see from the 25% target for Black people in voting rights and economic interest. In this case, it refers to Black legal practitioners. It increased by 5% to 30%, and then incrementally for the next 3 years up to 40%. So there's actually a 15% increase in your targets for QSEs on eventually. Black women legal practitioners still get recognition, and then there's a bonus points included both in the large and the QSE sector for Black legal practitioners with disabilities, both on voting rights and economic interest. Throughout from here on, apart from just the board participation, recognition will not necessarily be given on a second line for Black women, but for designated categories, which includes Black women, youth, Black youth, Black people with disabilities, and Black people from rural areas to be recognized. So I'm not sure how the rural areas always in an employment situation will apply. So very specifically, if you are in a town or a city, you're not regarded as rural. It's the outskirts of those is defined as rural. So the question is, how does the LSC envisage actually in terms of employment? Is it Black people, legal practitioners that lives in rural areas that will be recognized here? I'm not sure about that, but that is what's required in terms of this code. If we look at the large enterprises, and I want to show you actually there's a significant increase in the target here. Now you've got to know actually that there's a 25% target for voting rights and economic interest, and then 10% for Black women. In this regard, it's ramped up to 40% from the 25% and to 25% from the 10%. But then increased to 50% and 35%. So it's actually double up on the targets, and more than that, actually 3.5 times actually your women target. That is to achieve the full weighting points. If you achieve a portion of that, obviously the principle applies that you get a portion of the points here. So very important that, in your strategy going forward, if you have achieved full points by just have a 25-point-something% Black ownership, it's not going to get the full points anymore, and that will mean a drop in your score on that side. The principles of being applied actually on the calculation methodology flow through. All of that still applies. The LSE does not even refer to any of those principles. So because it's silent, we have to refer back. So all of the mechanisms that is still applicable in terms of the generic code is still applicable in terms of the LSC for ownership purposes on that as well. If we go into the management control section of the scorecard, you'll notice that there's various mechanisms that is measured here, very specifically referring to equity participation of Black legal practitioners. That is very specifically your vote actually that you have on the board, based on your, and most probably it will be linked also to your equity that you have. So your vote is linked to whatever shareholding you have. It does not refer to the number of Black board members, for instance, but very specifically the equity participation. So that's something. So your voting rights would most probably in this case be equal to your voting right, which is applied in your shareholding, unless you have some sort of arrangement in your shareholders agreement that there's a different way of voting on board matters, for instance. Apart from that, and that measures obviously gender very specifically here as well. Apart from that, going from here onwards, executive management, senior management, and the rest is measuring Black people very specifically, and legal practitioners in that regard, and then also going into Black people with very specifically designated categories also included in that component. So looking at the targets, some of these targets have increased, some of them have reduced actually, but even for a QSE, we had previously on the generic code just 2 lines, actually executive management and non-executive management. The executive management meant actually your exco and your non-executive, everyone else in the business. Is actually now required to be measured very much more in detail actually. So executive management, senior management with its own targets actually, and then there's a second page for middle management and junior management, and then support staff. So much more detail for you that falls now into this 3 to 15 million turnover. Previously, if you had a turnover of between 10 and 50, you would have been required to be measured in QSE. So some of you would automatically now progress to be a large entity, because if you exceeded that 15 million turnover, you're now required to be a large entity in that regard. So looking at the large entity scorecard, quite similar actually to what we have seen now on the QSE side. Targets are increased. On board participation, very specifically increased targets actually. You're starting off with your existing targets of 50%. Women has a larger target, but then move on to 60% and 45% of your board to consist of, and that should, to some extent, it is not aligned very specifically with your ownership component, but there's definitely an increase there. As I said, actually for executive management and the likes, we measure here very specifically designated categories and the likes actually, as well as just generic measurement of Black people, referring to that. So the question is always who is classified as Black people here, and the same principle still applies: African, colored, and Indian people who are South African citizens or naturalized before 27 April of 1994. So measurement of your different management levels, referred to as senior management, for instance, or HODs. Or practice group leaders, for instance, depending on what you refer to. All of them are referred to as a senior management level, which is measured. And more or less a little bit lower target initially that you are measured against compared to the generic codes. If we look at the middle management section, again, yes, we're starting off with a lower target, but then move into more target with more parity actually in that regard. And by a very interesting, your middle management section referred to senior associates and professional assistants. So that is what is classified as this middle management section. So thinking about your structure, where do you fit in that regard? Your junior management, very specifically looking at associates and PAs in that regard, and then your support staff, all of your support staff, which they refer to non-legal support and other consulting staff, as a much lower target actually. Interestingly, if you look at the drafting of the code, it refers to, for instance, the target for support and other consulting management refers to 06 and 09 and then 13. And I'm not sure what is the intent, because in some instances there's sometimes a comma before the digit. So does it mean in some instances a lower target even? So I'm not sure whether it was the intent from the drafter to refer to 0.6 and then reduced. It doesn't. We don't know. So that is some of the cleanup that one wants to see technically in terms of this code. When you read the draft code, you will also notice that the weighting points that is adding up the weighting points compared to what is shown in the summary number of the LSC is sometimes different. They differ by 1 point or something like that. So all of these type of issues actually. Fact of the matter is that we're ending up with targets, actually quite high targets for middle management, very specifically. Junior management is actually lower than generic codes. And then you have very specific targets for support and other consulting staff, which were probably part of your junior and middle management previously. The measurement principles in terms of the EAP targets is still applicable here, very much so. So you have to calculate your targets based on the economically active population targets of the country, whether it is on a national basis or on a regional basis in that regard. So one interesting fact that is very specifically mentioned in the LSC is when you are verified by the verification agency, they are required to scrutinize the salary register and compare for salary parity, actually, whether a person in a certain management level earns the same amount or whether they are parity. There's a lot of, it's not a requirement per se that persons can be disqualified, but if you hold it back, you will be disqualified from the verification altogether. So that is just something that you need to note. I don't think it's anyway part of practice here with any of you that there's different parities and all of that, but just something that is very explicitly stated in the LSC as such. Going into the skills development scorecard, and yes, this is quite a detailed scorecard, quite a lot of things that actually being measured. And going further, still something that I still want to have to get more clarity from the draft themselves, actually, on how it's being calculated. Still, the completion, submission of workplace skills plans applies. Priority skills implementation, specifically for Black people, is required. And without that proof, actually, you cannot score anything on the skills development scorecard. So make sure that you do submit all of that. There is a very specific focus towards young people in the skills development scorecard. A lot of the measurement is very specifically referred to candidate attorneys and then also to junior attorneys to a large extent in the scorecard. Still, there's specifically reference being made for the Charter Council to announce specific training and capacity building initiatives that will enhance your score. Obviously, we'll have to wait for the Charter Council to announce that once they get active in this regard. Also, the EAP targets again applies as previously in the generic codes version. If we look at the skills development for attorneys, and we look at I'm comparing now here the QSEs and the large numbers, you'll notice that there's a very specifically higher number actually being required for a skills development expenditure, starting off for the QSEs to 6.5% of your leviable amount, moving to 7.5%. And actually for a large 7.5% to 8.5%. And that is very specifically for recognizable training expenditure that is incurred. Now, the LSC is very silent on things like, for instance, your article clerks, actually, whether their salaries are included. So I take it because it is silent on the matter, the generic code mechanism can be applied. I would have liked to see more detail around that to make it clear, because you actually left a little bit in the dark on that side. The second component very specifically measures and in a preamble to that refers to skills development for Black candidate attorneys and junior legal practitioners from designated categories, but then obviously measure Black people and then Black designated categories, and even stating that it's only for Black candidate attorneys in the detail. So whether the junior attorneys will still, junior practitioners will still be applied here is a question. I see it as the header allows for that, so it can be recognized. The difference between the two I would say, what I read is that training initiatives very specifically directed for the recruitment of candidate attorneys, etc. Compared to the first line, which is just a general type of training that you got to know, or training for candidate attorneys, salaries that we'll do, etc. So time is actually not on our side in this, and I want to show you that there's very specific targets also for specialized law areas, again measured against your leviable amount. And then there's the headcount component, as you got to know, also for learnerships as well. The targets very much in line for the learnerships as what we've got to know on the generic codes. The specialized training is a separate component. So if you add it all together, it might become quite a harsh total, because the one is at 3%, the other one is a 6.5%, 7.5% target. So it becomes quite a significant amount for you to achieve the full points eventually on the scorecard. Then another introduction by this code is very specifically measurement of a training or mentorship program apart from the support and staff that is support staff that is also being measured as a separate target here, but very specifically the introduction of a mentorship program. Actually, no details are available, so I'm not sure what is intended by the LSC and whether they will afterwards publish some more details. They don't even mention something of publication afterwards. I expect something, and I will definitely ask the question whether there will be details around the mentorship, etc., how it will be measured, because there's a target of 2%. 2% of what? Is it the people, number of people, whatever the case is, it's spend incurred, what is the case on that? So that's a little bit difficult for us to just understand. On the skills development for advocates, actually more focused towards your advocates, actually, whether you are a QSE or large entity in that regard, towards junior Black advocates, so advocates with less than 5 years of experience. And there it's measured actually that you as an advocate who falls into the scorecard will have to provide training to junior advocates, targets being actually they refer to 40 hours in the wording, and then goes to targets like 45 and 50 hours per annum to be spent, and then very specifically for very specific specialized areas of training, apart from the fact that there's also a requirement for you to contribute to the Legal Sector Transformation Fund, a fund that will be set up, and that fund will have the object of either skills development or or enterprise and supplier development. So apart from that, there's also some mentorship that is required here towards a junior advocate, and then very specifically, as I said, also some specialized law area training that is required. So again, it speaks to the area of access and giving more access towards Black advocates in this area, to ensure their training gets counted at the end of the day. So yeah, that is just the requirements. Still, your training expenses can be measured against like training courses, fees, of course, cost of trainers, facilities, course fees. All of that is still included in your training expenses that can be done. I think that what you need to take out here, much more in higher targets that you have than compared to what you got used to, and then much more detail in terms of who counts where and who can be actually. So thinking about senior management, for instance, or senior legal practitioner, training towards that for a Black senior legal practitioner will most probably just get counted on the specialized areas, specialized law areas of this. But I expect that is where a senior person will get some training because they've gone through them all already. Going into procurement, that's quite an interesting one. Just the principle that we need to apply here, pass-through third-party expenditure is normally expenditure that's not disclosed in your financial statement. So you incur the cost probably on behalf of your client, but you don't account for it in your financial statements. Sometimes the cost of, for instance, advocates is most probably running through the trust, the client's trust account, and not in your books. But that has a very specific bearing on your procurement, because the procurement is focusing on skills development or procurement from advocates very specifically. And the reason is because you, as the attorney, has the discretion in that regard. So very specific word to use, and very specifically with regards to that, the procurement of from Black advocates and Black women advocates is very specifically a component which is measured in terms of the procurement scorecard. So the procurement scorecard actually for attorneys have two lines. One is the procurement from of legal services from Black advocates as a percentage of all procurement from from advocates. So starting off with a target of 60%. For Black advocates and going up to 80%, and then for women a little bit just a little bit less. And then the second component is the procurement that we know, and actually that is procurement from all suppliers actually to support the business actually. But the requirement here is very specifically procurement from suppliers that are 75% Black owned and 51% Black owned designated groups. By the way, designated groups in this regard is referred to as Black people from rural areas with disability, military veterans, youth, and the likes actually. So those are the designated groups that is currently on your generic code. You've got a bonus point of that, 2 bonus points actually for that. So this is what is get measured, higher targets to a large extent. Compared to what you have, and then the challenge is to find suppliers actually with 75% Black ownership. That is not a usual number to use. The 51% designated groups is something that we got to know, but 75% Black owned, and that you will have to it is disclosed on the B certificate anyway. So just making sure on that one. So for your enterprise and supplier development, this is very specifically a very interesting area. Focusing initially on partnering, JV, subcontracting to legal practices, and very specifically requiring the business actually to subcontract with exempt legal enterprises of a level 1, so it's a Black-owned exempt legal enterprise, or 75% Black-owned legal sector measured entity. So it doesn't refer to any size in that regard, although in the narratives they do refer to supporting small Black-owned practices. So, but it's not in the requirement as such. And then also subcontracting as a second line, actually 75% Black-owned LSMEs or 51% owned by designated categories again. The second component of your enterprise and supply development very specifically focused towards contributions being made. And again, it doesn't very specifically specify what is the target or on which is the target based. Refer to 10% going up to 16%. Now, in a generic code, you measure it against your net profit after tax. You had a target of 1% and 2% of your NPAT. On that side, so suddenly it's moving up to 10% and up to 16% in 3 years of your net profit after tax, if we interpret it properly. As a second line, there's a monetary contribution being required actually to be made to this legal sector transformation fund, and depending on what your turnover or your net profit will be, it will be a 1%, 2%, up to 5%. There's no requirements. It's not linked to your NPAT. So it could be insignificant against your net profit, or it could be quite a significant amount as it is at the moment, running between 10 and 18 million or 18,000 actually for the large enterprises in that. As a closing, your socioeconomic development. very specifically focus on access from Black people in rural areas, community legal centers, and then also for commercial type of contracting services, with very specific targets. Each have a weighting of 2 points, adding up to 6 points. And some of these targets are based on the LSME, so the practice, starting off with 24 hours for rural areas, community legal centers, depending on the size, actually anything between 24 and 100 hours for the practice. But then for contractual assistance or commercial assistance and so on, drafting of contracts, I would say, it very specifically is based on the legal practitioner's targets there. So it could be quite a significant target if you have quite a few of your partners there. So there's an alternative. If you don't want to do the pro bono type of hours here, you are required as an alternative to contribute to an NGO in your area, actually, for community development. So that there's a very set target, a number being included. It's not linked to a net profit after tax. Looking at about between 20 and 30,000 rands, and then a second line also on contributions to initiatives, actually, of economic development initiatives. So something that you have to look to very specifically at NGOs, whereas we can also provide you with that type of recognition, also with the same type of compliance targets. Interesting thing is that the weighting points for this alternative does not add up to the 6 points. So I assume that they actually meant 3 points each. So something to clarify. Be as it may, I think you have the option of either go pro bono route if you are involved in that, or contribution route. Contribution route, I think my numbers to some of our clients indicated that it's quite a significant. It's not just 1% of your profit. It's becoming 2, 3, 4, 5% sometimes of your profits. Also, requirement that 100% of the benefits must reach Black people. Previously, in the generic codes, there's always a requirement for 75% because you need to have some leeway. All communities are not just consisting of very specifically Black people who qualifies in terms of the B-BBEE Act. So yeah, that is just on this, and that's I would say a very high level overview. I think we can spend probably a full morning on discussing this, and even going into more details and all the anomalies on this. What is the fact is that we need to ensure that we start to get ready, because it is the requirement that once it's published and promulgated, it is final. So then you have to apply that. So you don't have really time to wait and to hope for a phasing in, although I know there's going to be calls to the minister actually on that. It's definitely something that we need to do. As a closing, the support cycle, when you think of a support cycle for your verification or for your scorecard, make sure that you plan your verification process very well. Prepare for that. Make sure that you have that through the year, actually, you do some scorecards, do an assessment, do at least a few assessments during the year and set certain point in time, to ensure that you get ready for the verification. The verification on itself, those of you that went through that knows that it's quite a comprehensive process, which includes quite a lot of work and preparation, and it's not always for the faint-hearted, I would say. So that is just something for you to consider. Going into the development of a plan, just make sure that you have a baseline. Where are you coming from? And by the way, we have a fully created and developed legal sector scorecard already. You won't find that in any of the maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't seen any of the automated scorecards currently providing for this. And I'm not sure if they will. But we have a full scorecard already running. You can submit your information. We can provide you with a quote. and we can run for giving you a baseline. And on the back of that, we can then obviously provide you with some assistance to develop a plan actually on that. Whether you want to just have a plan or have an integrated strategy developed on that, it is your decision at the end of the day, where we will take a little bit more time and formulate a full strategy which is linked to your business principles as well.
Anton, thank you very much for pushing in so much information in a very short while. I think there's a lot to be able to discuss still and to be cleared up in the draft code. So I'm saying goodbye from my side. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending.
Thanks, everyone. It's a pleasure presenting to you.